Welcome to our Lunch and Learn on children who don't want to go to school and what to do. I am Liz Stevens. I'm a psychologist with the Waterloo Region District School Board, and I'm presenting with my colleague, who I'll let introduce herself.
Thank you, Liz. My name is Anna Polotska, and I'm also a psychologist at the school board. And I'm controlling the text, so I might be a little distracted. My apologies.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about school refusal, the psychology of school refusal when kids don't want to go to school, and then what you can do as a parent to help support your child if this is an issue for you. So what we know about children not wanting to go to school is that about a quarter, so 25% of all children will engage in some degree of school refusal during the schooling years. These can range from just complaints like, I don't want to go to school, or I'm not going to go to school if you do this, to missing school for months or even years at a time. So there's a wide range of sort of severity of school refusal behavior. Fear or a specific phobia about school only accounts for a very small percentage of youth who refuse to go to school. And we know that school refusal peaks at several points of development. So school entry in kindergarten is when we see the first sort of incidence of school refusal, of course, because that's when school starts. Around the ages of 7 and 9, there's also a peak in children who start to challenge the idea of going to school. And again, with transition to middle school and transition to high school. Those are both sort of difficult times developmentally for some kids. And that's when we tend to see more school refusal happening. And boys and girls are actually equally affected by school refusal behavior.
So we thought we could introduce a model that is very commonly used in psychology. It's known as a CBT, or cognitive behavioral theory model. And we thought it would be very helpful to understand why school refusal happens and how you can help your child or your teen to cope with the situations that might be either causing or supporting the school refusal or difficulties in attending school. So this model suggests that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all connected and interrelated. And most of psychologists working these days find that this model is quite helpful. And on a given day, with a given situation, we can work with either behaviors or feelings or thoughts, or try to understand all three at once, which is hard and complex sometimes. But it does help to be aware of all these three aspects. And we will be talking very briefly. We could easily spend weeks talking about this, but we will briefly touch on every part of this triangle. And we'll start with thoughts. You probably know that thoughts are powerful. Thoughts are subject of philosophy work, psychology work, social science work, and our kids have as many thoughts as we do as adults. And it's helpful to consider, what are those thoughts that are going through a child's mind in the moment? We have this cogito ergo sum sign there. We know that the idea that thoughts define being comes from philosophy, from René Descartes. And in modern psychology, we sometimes go back to these works to consider how are thoughts influencing our existence in the moment, or how do thoughts affect our behaviors, and how they might be impacting our feelings. When it comes to school refusal, thoughts are usually quite negative. And we know from research that negative thoughts are actually much easier to generate in almost any situation. Somehow we are wired to produce many negative thoughts. And it takes a lot of practice to shift the way we think about situations to produce more neutral or more positive thoughts, no matter what the situation is. So some examples of some of those negative thoughts, or thoughts that would prevent your child to feel good about going to school and would actually stop them and make it really hard to go to school, would be something like, I'm really not good at school. Why would it be going? I'm not learning anything. It's really boring. What if I can find my classroom? And we hear that more often around transition times when kids are starting new school or transitioning to middle school or high school. And Liz will talk about that as well later. Some fears, and they're usually not so much about the actual frightening things, but how the child is thinking and feeling about certain situations. Often we hear from kids thoughts like, nobody will like me, and for good reasons, parents might be concerned that kids at the school are mean, but more common than not, it's not so much the actual situation that kid is not liked, but the thought that, what if others don't like me? What if I can't make friends? So those thoughts and those red flags, such as what if, and I'm never good, so words like never or what if tells you that that's one of those anxious negative thoughts.
So sometimes kids can articulate their thoughts to us, and sometimes that's really challenging. And we can talk about how to have those conversations in a little bit. But one thing that kids often will talk about when they are feeling like they don't want to go to school is physical symptoms, right? And that can be really challenging as a parent to sort out. And so when kids are anxious or nervous about a situation, that can present physically. So sometimes kids will report feeling dizzy. Sometimes there's sort of a need to go to the bathroom. Headaches can become more common. Kids might say they feel really tense. They might feel like their heart's racing. They might even get to the point where they feel, almost out of control. So, their breath might be more difficult to catch. Even some kids will throw up. So all of these physical symptoms are ones that can occur and can something to sort out when a child doesn't want to go to school. I would say in my experience, the number one is tummy aches or abdominal pain, and recurrent abdominal pain related to attending school is probably one of the most common physical symptoms that I see. And then there's the emotional symptoms, which again are we can't necessarily observe emotions, but kids may communicate this to it, or we may interpret their behavior as indicating that they are experiencing some of these emotions. So sometimes kids get really angry. Sometimes they'll express anxiety, fear, worry. They may be feeling some embarrassment, maybe about something that happened the day before at school. They may be expressing some loneliness, right? And the loneliness may be about how they are feeling when they're in a classroom or in a school. That is, they're not making strong connections with peers. Or it may be a loneliness for a parent or a family member who's remaining behind at home. Some kids will express sadness that they need to leave home and go to school. And some kids may be feeling ashamed about something, and that can certainly contribute to wanting to stay away from school. So a range of emotions. Anxiety is often very common, but a number of these other emotions can also appear when kids are refusing to go to school. Next slide.
Can I quickly add to just thinking again about the triangle? What comes to mind is that sometimes it's easier to notice the physical symptoms for observers, for parents, or for teachers. Some kids are really good in identifying how they feel. So they would say, I feel anxious, or I feel ashamed or embarrassed. Other kids might not be yet able to identify those emotions, or they might be really confusing to the child, and they might not be able to label emotions. And you might only see behaviors, which will be the next part of this presentation. Yet I think it's important to keep in mind that all those three components, going back to the triangle, all those three components are typically present to some degree. And it's what's easier for us as parents, or for us as educators or psychologists, to to give us a sense that, oh, this is what's going on. So behaviors, typically the ones that that's what we see, right? And the typical behavior that accompanies difficult situations is avoidance. Liz, do you want to go on? Sorry.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So avoidance can look like a lot of different things. Avoidance is our sort of human reaction to feeling distress, is that we want to stay away from the situation that is making us feel upset, whether it's making us feel anxious or angry or irritable. And so some of the behaviors you may see are things like, refusing to separate from a parent. We see that, at the kindergarten door, especially in the first weeks of school. There may be complaints about a teacher, about a subject. We might see crying. We might see things like avoiding to turn in homework assignments. And sometimes when I work with children who have a lot of anxiety about perfectionism, or about being negatively evaluated, there is sort of a dynamic that can happen where kids don't want to turn in their homework anymore because they fear for what the reaction is going to be from the teacher. And so that's not avoiding the building, but that is avoiding a piece of school that can happen because of some social anxiety. Sometimes we see, because students often have phones at school, that there will be lots of phone calls or texts to a parent looking for them to help the child avoid school. There might be lies, right? Lies to get away from something that's very distressing. So not so much being like lying to manipulate, but lying actually to get out of a fearful or distressing situation. Some kids will run away. Some kids, as they get older, they'll skip class. And then we can also see things like some children will have trouble concentrating when they are feeling that school is an unhappy place for them. And we might also see, if their distress is very high, that they withdraw from others, whether that's peers, teachers, and even parents in some circumstances.
And I think very often some of those behaviors are really hard for parents to see. And I think our intuition as parents, we want to help our kids, obviously. And when the child is crying, or when the child is saying, I really cannot do this, the instinct would be, okay, let's do something else and not go to school, or let's not submit this paper, or let's find an easier way. And unfortunately, it often feeds into making anxiety about school worse. So what can you do, and how do you remain as a parent, and sometimes as an educator, how do you remain supportive and warm and caring, and yet not feed into the fears and anxiety about school? I think one important thing, because there are these physical symptoms that Liz talked about, it really is important to check those physical symptoms and what we call rule out the possibility that there is a physical cause for either headaches or fatigue or stomach aches, whatever is your child experiencing. And sometimes, unfortunately, there are additional things that are going on, and it is important to keep a tap on that. If you have ruled out, and if you're with certain certainty can say, okay, I know my child is healthy, I know the stomach ache is not because they had a food poisoning, or there is some biological issue with the digestion, then you can do other things. Liz, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think it's challenging right now. We are in the midst of a global pandemic, and so it's really tricky. You want to be responsible about when you send your child to school, but we also know that this is a time when children are missing a lot of school for physical symptoms, but also because the anxiety that kids experience when they are away from school for a few days can become elevated. And so the physical symptoms may still be real, but it may be more about anxiety about returning to school than it is about something physical. So it is a tough call sometimes, but we'll talk a little bit more in a second about how to kind of sort that out with your child. Once you know that school refusal is not because of an illness, it's really important to sit down and talk with your child about what might be bothering them, and validate their feelings. I can understand that you are worried about doing a presentation, or, finding someone to sit with at lunch when you're in grade 10 can feel really tough. So validate their feelings, listen, and avoid lecturing about you really need to get back to school. The first step to setting a foundation for problem solving is having the child feel heard and understood. At the same time, it's really important to make it clear to the child that a plan is going to be made with them to return, and having that confidence in them is super important to them, feeling confident that they are able to overcome this difficulty that they're having. You can't force these conversations. And in some cases, kids really don't have the words yet to describe what's going on with them, or it may be something that they can't articulate to you for a number of reasons. Keeping those opportunities going to have the conversations are super important. With teenagers, I always say going for a drive or going for a walk side by side. Those are opportunities for having conversations that feel less threatening to the child. But really, at the end of the day, the message needs to be from you is, I believe in your ability to overcome this challenge, and I'm going to help you. But not attending school, not overcoming this problem is not an option. And that's the other side of the coin, is that it's super important to let your kids know that school is not optional until you're 18. And so we need to work on this problem together to solve it.
And I think that pandemic really added to this challenge, right? Because it was almost optional to be in the building, because there was an alternative way to learn, and for some kids that alternative still exists. But I think if the family decision together is that the in-person school is where the child is going, and this is for the majority of young people, children and young adults, actually been shown to be a better way to learn, then that is the plan. And I think, like I said, pandemic did make this idea that school might be being physically in the building might be optional. It kind of planted some seeds that are making the work with school avoidance harder for everyone, for professionals, for parents, for kids themselves, because they had this experience where if there's a slightest, runny nose, a cough, a slightest malaise, then it's an option not to go. So it's really hard. So at this point, with with some word of reason, when you can, please, whenever possible, do not let your child avoid, because we know that the more a person avoids due to those anxious thoughts, those unpleasant physical sensations, due to negative emotions of anxiety and shame and anger, the more likely they are to avoid again. Avoidance provides reinforcement to anxiety, and anxiety actually becomes bigger. And rather than learning how to cope with anxiety, how to decrease the anxiety in healthy ways, if a person avoids, they learn that is the easiest way to cope. And unfortunately, the anxiety just becomes bigger and bigger, and it becomes a bigger issue, and it tends to grow even outside of school. We know that quite often, if a child stops going to school, they might stop going to sport events, to leave the house. So you really don't want to get to that level of difficulty. So whenever possible, do not let your child avoid because of those anxious thoughts or unpleasant feelings.
So one of the things we can do as parents is play a bit of detective. If our child cannot articulate why it is that they don't want to go to school, these kinds of detective work can be really helpful. So looking for patterns of when your child complains of not wanting to go to school. So do they wake up on those days with a stomach ache or a headache? Is that a day when they have a test, when they have a presentation, when there's gym class, and that can give us some clues as to what's going on, what's causing the difficulty for them. If your child is distracted, if your child has a plan to walk with a friend to school, does that make the anxiety or the distress lower? Does your child feel ill on Saturdays? You know, that's always a good indicator of whether the anxiety or the distress is related to school. If on non-school days you don't see that, then that's a pretty good piece of evidence that the school is what's causing the distress for the child.
And I think when you're able to get this evidence as a detective, then it can help you create a plan together, right? If it's the noise or unsupervised activities that are the most stressful, then you can work around it and still allow the child to be in school, and yet maybe decrease the demands, decrease the stress around those specific situations, and build their tolerance, allow them to practice with less stressful things while still being at school, and then gradually increase how much they can tolerate being in those more stressful parts of the school day. And for that, I would say it's extremely important to talk to your school. And there are actually big and very helpful teams in schools that can help parents together with the children to develop plans that would make it easier to cope with stressful situations. So sometimes, especially for younger children, but often for older youth as well, having someone come out of the school building and meet and greet your child and then walk together with them can be very helpful and can help them feel that they're not alone in coping with, the fears that they're facing or the sense of awkwardness that they might feel. Sometimes there could be some initial modifications of how the school day might look like for some students. Some activities, if there are particular activities that are causing a lot of distress for a child, those can be altered initially, and then again we slowly build their capacity to cope with those situations. So, and it's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing problem solving, right? School staff is well equipped, well, hopefully, depending on some obviously factors that are not dependent on them, but in general, there might be an odd day when your principal is not there, or someone, or your teacher needs to be away. But generally speaking, there are many well-trained professionals in the school building who will be available and can support your child's ability to cope with building their capacity and being able to cope with how they can tolerate those stressful situations. Liz, do you want to add?
Yes. Well, on the next slide, I think is just a little bit of a something I've noticed over the years is that when children have a pattern of missing a lot of school, stress on both sides is really, really high. So the stress is very high for parents because in most cases, parents really want their kids to get to school and they're having, pretty tremendous struggles. And for school staff too, they may be feeling a lot of stress as well about how are they going to teach this child who's missing days and days of school. They want to support, and they may be feeling their own thoughts, feelings around a situation where a child doesn't come to school. They may be feeling badly, maybe that something has gone wrong or that there's a learning challenge. So I think it's really important to keep an open mind, whether you're a parent or a teacher, and really listen to each other. And I think part of that listening is if there is a real issue around bullying, if there's a real issue around, reading being hard, and my child feels really badly when I have to read aloud, it's really important that you can have open conversations, listen to each other, and then work together to help solve the problem.
And I think next slide is one of my favorite. Don't make it appealing to stay at home. Home is quite appealing, right? There is a warm bed, you don't have to change, and there are screens and TVs and toys and parents. There are a lot of things that can feel quite a lot more welcoming than the school far away where you need to get dressed, go out in the cold, and then face some of those challenges. So if you can work together on making, as a family, making a plan, if the situation is such that a child is staying home, that there is no TV, no video games during the daytime, during school time, that it is really quite a boring time at home. As bad as it sounds, it is necessary that school becomes more appealing, at least in some ways, that yes, there are friends that I can be with, or there's recess where I can run around, or there are teachers that I can chat with. Whereas if I'm at home, yes, my pajama is really comfortable, and yet there's really not much to do for this whole day. So ideally, you create a situation where school becomes more fun and more appealing compared to spending a day at home.
Consistency is super important. When we're feeling anxious, worried, or irritable, having a routine and sticking to it is really reassuring to kids. And you can do as much as you can to make morning routines very smooth. Plan things the night before, put clothes out, pack the backpack as much as you can, set an alarm. And again, just remind your child that not going to school is not an option, that we are making this plan together. We're going to do the same thing every day. And I'll do everything I can to help you. But at the end of the day, you are going to be heading to school in the morning.
And sometimes to make it more appealing to go to school and not to avoid, it helps to create some incentives. Praise is one of the best incentives, actually. If you can praise the child for their effort, for using some of the coping strategies, that's fantastic. If you can decrease the amount of time that you spend in saying goodbyes, if it's simple, it can be a ritual, but it should be quite short and simple, so they don't get stuck in the saying goodbyes. That is known to be quite helpful in helping with that transition between home and school. If you have a friend who can walk with them to school, that's great. It shifts their attention from, oh no, I'm leaving home, to, oh, I have a friend now and I can talk about something else. That can be quite helpful as well. Trying to have different caregivers. If you have two parents and maybe grandparents, you can try that. Sometimes it's helpful to have another caregiver to bring child to school. That could be a part of the plan as well, and have some plan B and plan C, right? If you can't walk into the door right away, then maybe you can go to the playground first and then you meet a teacher there. Or if it's hard to go alone, then you can go with a friend. So having those options and empowering your child in creating this plan. And those are just some examples, but there are really infinite amount of ideas that I'm sure parents and teachers and caregivers can come up with really allowing the child to feel empowered and to get back the control over those stressful situations.
I think Anna kind of talked about this, but getting support in these situations is super helpful and can be really important. And you know, sometimes if you have a neighbor or a friend or a relative who can help with the actual goodbye part of going to school, that can be super helpful, and also having someone at school who can greet your child and support them, especially the first few days after a long absence. That can make things go a lot smoother for your child.
And there are many strategies, and I'm sure in other lunch and learns we have touched on that as a psychology department. And as I mentioned, there are many well-trained professionals in the school who can help you learn those, and it can help your child practice those at school and during transition times. Teaching a child to practice calming breathing and calming relaxation exercises is very helpful. And you need to practice in situations that are not overly stressful. It's really hard to do it for the first time when you're freaked out. So keep in mind that whichever techniques you are learning and using together with your child, it's a really good idea to practice in non-stressful situations. And be patient. I think that's really important. It's not easy. It's really hard for parents to be with a child who is in a lot of distress, and a school avoidance can very quickly get to the point that it's very distressing to everyone around child. Liz?
Yeah, and so I think it's being patient, being calm, looking after yourself as a parent is super important, because those moments when you know your child is possibly clinging to you, when they are perhaps angry with you because you're forcing them in their minds to do something that feels very scary to them, those are hard moments as a parent. So super important to, when you can, take a breath, take a break, connect with a friend, and connect with the folks at school, because there are many folks, I can tell you, in the school system who are there to support you. So reach out, connect. Don't do this alone, because this is hard work. And then we wanted to share with you some resources. Certainly at the schools, there are highly trained school social workers, as well as highly trained and experienced child and youth workers in every school. And then we also listed some community resources if you need to go beyond that.